Well, welcome everyone to NJ Cannabis Insider's first webinar. We've got some fantastic speakers here today, and you're joining us all in our respective homes right now. We have Scott Rudder, with the president of the New Jersey Cannabis Association, Jackie Cornell, the Health and Policy Innovation Chief for 1906, and Bill Caruso with Archer. Thanks everybody for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having
me. Good to see you.
Thanks, guys.
And folks in our audience, if you will see that you have a chat at the bottom of the Zoom, and if you could, if you have questions here, please send them along that way. Also, let us know where you are, where you're watching from, and what your interests are in this, especially as it relates to business. So we're just going to get started here. So we've all been hearing the stories of the various alternative treatment centers. Folks are generally concerned about what's happening with COVID-19. And we're facing some serious challenges in New Jersey with the medicinal marijuana program, including, long lines for patients, often waiting several hours just to get access to their medication. And in the case of Harmony and Secaucus, recently closing for what appears to be a couple of days. So are we starting to see how fragile the program is when it gets seriously tested?
I think we're starting to see some good things and bad things. Here's some good things. This industry is an essential industry. These dispensaries have been declared essential operations, not just here in New Jersey, but basically in almost every jurisdiction across the land right now. And I think if you think about previous disasters, that wasn't even contemplated. So to that end, that's a positive. Another positive I'd say to you is that I have never seen more innovation coming out of a department than I am, and I'll give extreme credit to Assistant Commissioner Jeff Brown and his team. They are blowing the doors off every regulatory burden that they have to right now to keep this thing running. But I would say this to you, the fragility of this industry and the fragility of our medical delivery system is a bottleneck that occurs at the federal level. I'm in South Jersey right now in Camden County. If my store runs out of bread, we can get bread anywhere in the country. We don't have that ability right now. Thank God, supply doesn't seem to be an issue right now, but there are going to be issues down the line, and we don't have the ability to tap a national supply chain network right now. That's because of the issues at the federal level. And I am impressed what I've seen go on right now into triage from a regulatory standpoint, from industry marshaling resources, and frankly, patients and doctors too, that are coming up with their own ingenuity on how to manage through this right now. It's been nothing short of impressive.
I'll double down on a lot of Bill's comments. I think what we're really starting to see is the fragility of so many of our social service systems, right? And our healthcare system in general. There's been a lot of coverage about what's going on with the national stockpile, right? So the national stockpile is basically a large warehouse of supplies and equipment for things like this. And it was depleted during H1N1, and it has been slowly cut funding. And I think we're starting to see sort of the fragility of federal government in this current administration. I think Governor Murphy deserves, they are up against almost unprecedented levels of crisis right now. This isn't a hurricane. This isn't a blizzard. This isn't something that, okay, everybody, get your milk, get your eggs, we'll see you in 6 days. This is a long haul. And I think Jeff Brown, the assistant commissioner, Judy Percitelli, the commissioner, obviously, you're seeing everybody put as much ingenuity and good thinking into things as they can. But the fragility of the program is a larger implication of the fragility of the systems.
Right. No, I have to completely agree with what they said. And look, there's a lot of different things that are going on. Our first responders right now are putting their lives at stake, but so are the nurses and doctors and people who work at these essential businesses and the dispensary operators and those who work there. We need to make sure that patients are getting the medicine that they need. The issues at the federal level are exaggerated right now. We're seeing it. We're seeing all the flaws in the system. But at the same time, we're looking at innovation, what's going on here at Department of Health, what Jeff Brown and his team are doing. but patients need access to healthier and safer medicine that it's not addictive and you're not going to die from. And that needs to happen. We're seeing some progress now, but certainly more needs to happen.
Now speaking to that point, we actually had the Department of Health announced the easing of some of the current regulations yesterday with respect to greater access for caregivers as well as for curbside. Though I think we're still waiting to see for how those that's actually going to bear itself out. And what else needs to be done to help shore up the system for patients?
Well, I think this is a good start. And I think what they're looking at right now is everything they can do from a regulatory standpoint. Remember, there's statutory hurdles. Forget about the federal right now, but in the state, there's statutory hurdles. I'll come back to that in a second. But on the regulatory side, there's a lot of innovation, as Scott and Jackie both mentioned. So curbside delivery is going to be in effect. The ability to streamline the credentialing of employees. That way they can bring more people on in a short amount of time. And God forbid, these employees are going to suffer the same fate as other people that are going to go down sick as a result of this. And they want to be able to backfill to ensure that the supply continues for grow operations and processing, but also from retail. The other thing I'll tell you that I think is coming is I think we are going to see home delivery as a means that comes out of this crisis. And I don't know how quick that's going to happen. I know it's being worked on right now. We're seeing it in other jurisdictions, but home grow, which has been a topic, and we can come to that as a separate one, is not going to happen as a result of regulatory changes because of the statutory hurdles. And, I don't know that home grow is a short-term issue here. If home grow for patients were in place and had been since the 2009 law were passed, it could have served a role here, but it's realistically not in the short 2-week time going to be a solution to this. It may be over the long haul as we look at what can we do to improve from a long-term standpoint. That might be something that's considered, but has to go through statutory change before the department can even consider it.
Right. And I think, Bill's raising good points that this crisis is going to provide an opportunity to do a deeper dive into so many systems and see, okay, how do we tweak this? How do we change this? And what are the statutory changes that need to happen? The affordability issue has been an issue for forever, right? And so is this an opportunity for folks like, I believe it was Assemblyman Troy Singleton and others at one point were calling for something that was sort of like a state Medicaid waiver-like program for the cost, right? For folks who are already on some sort of assistance to come in and let state dollars support the cost of this. I think this is going to start to be some of the things that we're going to have to look at because you're going to be faced with sort of two large incoming issues. You have the existing patient load. Everybody has anxiety right now, right? And so everybody is looking for opportunities to manage that anxiety. And then you're dealing with the long-term economic rippling effects of what this is going to do to our economy. And you're going to have more and more people stretching our safety net programs. And we already know so many of the current patient population is on some sort of assistance, many because they're severely ill and others because they're just low income. How the program starts to adapt to what will be an influx of people wanting product for anxiety and an influx of people who are struggling financially. And that's going to be a real challenge. And it's going to have to take a collaborative statutory and regulatory. It can't just be the Department of Health. It has to come from statute.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing now too with just having a limited amount of license holders right now is a big issue, right? So having more product available, I mean, this is a matter of physics. It's not something we can just turn a machine on and start popping out pills like you can in regular manufacturing. This is the laws of physics. It takes a long time to grow, and it takes a long time to dry. It takes a long time for it to get to patients. And it's cost prohibitive for too many people. And too many people have to make a choice about paying the economic insecurity that's going on right now is dramatic, right? I mean, it just is. And so we really have to get to this point where we can have things that are more affordable for patients. Insurance is not covering this. It was great to see that the administration is reducing the cost for fees right now. The curbside's great. Getting to home delivery is going to be fantastic, but it's really going to come down to the price point. People shouldn't be making decisions between utility bills and cannabis as a medicine or opioids for that matter. I can get a 90-day supply for $10 of opioids. People need to have affordable access. And I think getting more licenses out there to more growers, more dispensaries, create competition, reduce prices while we still have to work with federal issues and getting insurance to cover a lot of this as a medicine.
Hey,
One
Justin,
quick
I
thing
just
I
want to
just
lift
have
up.
to. Oh.
Go ahead, Jackie. I was going to lift up something you said, but go ahead.
One quick thing I do have to note that is, I would be remiss if I didn't say this with my public health hat on. The desire to stay home and the department's willingness to bring on additional caregivers at $20 is a huge opportunity for folks. I know myself, we have, as our family, kind of triaged my son and myself to stay in. My partner's the one running out for groceries and running for the few things that we need, because folks with families are hypersensitive about being out in public and minimizing that as much as humanly possible. So having that ability for people to sort of designate a runner, right? Who's getting the groceries, who's going to the dispensary, doing that in a way that in a traditional time and place, people wouldn't need caregivers in the way that we've typically thought of them. That's a huge support to sort of the larger public health kind of good stewardship that we all need to do right now by staying home as much as possible.
It's absolutely the most important point right now. And I want to lift up something else that Jackie and Scott both said, because I think it's important. You're dealing with three people here that have all had significant experience in government in a variety of different levels. Jackie at the federal and state level. I have a little bit of federal experience, some state experience, and Scott was actually an elected official both at the local and state level and has worked at the federal level in a previous life. We've all been through several different disasters while we're working in government. And I think for people at home to think about this, and we have a lot of advocates on the phone, while you're sitting at home, while you're sheltering in place, while you're taking care of your family, think about breaking this up into two different parts. Government right now is triaging to make sure that we can get through this. And that counts for patients sitting at home too. There is a desperate attempt to make sure that supply of critical medicine, including medical marijuana, is available, continues to flow, and will be delivered safely. That is a paramount concern. They're trying to do everything in their power. But Jackie pointed this out. There are going to be some best practices and lessons learned that are going to be developed here. And potentially, maybe by the time we get to June, God willing, an opportunity to look at some of these things and start focusing on enacting statutory and regulatory reforms, not only at the state level, but potentially at the federal level. And we all have to band together and figure those out too. But right now, it's about surviving in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I mean, affordability, that's one of the recurrent issues that we keep having in this. And our affordability is, highly limited due to the, limited supply by the low number of current ACs out there. However, we've got a state, licensing process right now. How is that court stay going to work out now? Should we expect further delays on it? That's what I would expect. What do you guys think?
Unfortunately, yes. The courts are shut down right now, and we don't know when that's going to open up. You can absolutely expect that it will continue to delay. It's unfortunate. I mean, there would be an opportunity. Let's be realistic. If that award had gone through, if that RFA had been awarded, there would likely be the potential for more retail locations. I don't think there's any opportunity that there'd be any supply from a dispenser, from a vertical or a grow that would be available right now had they even made these awards in January. I think that's unrealistic. But yeah, there's a likelihood that there could have been more retail locations that would have been open that could help stem this. But listen, there is a court decision right now that no one can do anything about, and that is not going to change for the foreseeable future. And we're stuck with what we have. And so that's what the department's dealing with, right? This is the ship we're in. We're all rowing together in it.
Scott, Jack, anything else with that?
No, it's an unfortunate situation that we're in right now. And again, we talk about having more licenses will create more competition, which will reduce cost to patients. And I think this is, we're looking at a lot of lessons learned right now. And I think, a lot of us going through this process, through the legalization process, through ending prohibition, through expanding medical, some of these things took a long time. Some of them didn't get accomplished. We're looking at a ballot question coming up soon. In November. I think that will stay on the books. I don't think we're going to be pushing back November elections the way things are shaping up. So that's a good thing. But it also just talks about why we have to have greater access and ending prohibition and things we cared about a few weeks ago, things that were stymied the discussion of ending prohibition a few months ago. Those things seem to be very irrelevant right now. People really need the access that they need. And so hopefully, as Bill said, we're not going to change things right now through the court process, but it does put a glaring light on the need for greater expansion. And that includes medical and future adult use once we get the ballot question passed. But we also got to get the CRC, the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, stood up as soon as possible. Getting some of these regulations in place for home delivery and other benefits we can add to patients are going to be very important. And that requires regulations and there's actions that the state can be doing once we're able to get back to normal business. But as Bill said earlier, and Jackie said earlier, you have to give kudos to the Department of Health employees out there right now, try and get as innovative as they can with the rules that they have in front of them right now. And where they can make the rules, where they can bend the rules a little bit, they're doing that. We're seeing that right now with curbside pickup.
But I mean, would you expect to see the appointment of the CRC before the court or before the Department of Health? I mean, because that's generally, it seems like they're going to transition from the Department of Health's regulatory oversight to the CRC, and so close out that last piece of business. So, that.
I mean, I think that there's going to come a point in time where the plans that we had on this and a dozen other priorities in state government are going to have to shift. Like,
right.
To pretend that we're living in the same world we were living in, 9 days ago is foolish.
Yeah,
and
it's the new normal.
Yes. It's the new normal. And so if this wasn't going on, if COVID wasn't happening and that was sort of the pace work of it, okay, then that's what it is. I also realize that, this ballot question is coming. The election will still happen, even if we all vote by mail. You should all do vote by mail. It's an easy way to vote from home. Yeah. But the reality is like the world is going to keep spinning, even if it's a new world. And so seeing the new commission, the new Cannabis Regulatory Commission, the CRC, will have to happen. And I would argue it has to happen now more than ever. There has been several stories that have talked about at the federal level, but I think this ripples down to New Jersey incredibly strongly, looking at cannabis and the prohibition on cannabis as our ending the prohibition on alcohol to deal with the depression that happened, right? So we are going to need a monumental influx of jobs in this state and in this country to help mitigate. I mean, I have friends who are working in hotels, the restaurant industry. I mean, you name it. Everybody is taking a hit right now. Cannabis is something that we can do right now in this state today to bring more jobs. And it's not just the license holders, right? It's all of the ancillary businesses, packaging, marketing, lawyers, real estate, etc. Construction, tons of jobs, just building and managing the construction of these new facilities and dispensaries, security. So I think we're going to have to start looking at cannabis not just as like this thing that was interesting and important to do, but as a pathway out of what will, I fear, become a recession, because of what the economic implications are of this. That is not my wheelhouse. But it's going to be stressful. And so let's look to cannabis to be that pathway out, or one of many pathways out.
And it will be. And I just say this to you right now, you got to split this up into two different categories. The urgent, emergent need, and then the going forward, which will be soon upon us, I'm hopeful. The going forward, and it's rebuilding across the board. But I'll say this to you, we don't need the CRC right now. We don't need a single thing to complicate this. What we need right now on a government, the government has, in a time of emergency, broad discretion to literally eviscerate regulation where it stands in the way.
Yes.
When there is an impediment from a statutory effort that can't be cleared because of a regulatory burden, the Senate President and the Speaker have done two amazing things. They have already acted. They've been in on certain things right now to triage in consultation with this governor and this administration. They've also given themselves the ability to meet remotely now, so they can come back in an emergent effort. So I think right now what the department is doing is they are working expeditiously to triage through everything they can from a regulatory standpoint, including what you've seen, that is dealing with efforts related to curbside delivery, streamlining how you can hire and credential workers, this caregiver effort is going to be huge. And another thing that we haven't seen yet, but you saw working in the sort of broad medical community, an expansion of the telemedicine effort that also will allow folks that are sitting at home right now to be able to be re-upped for their card, or to consult a doctor now to get a card. These are things that are happening. They're not prospectively happening. They've happened or happening right now. And I think going forward, there are going to be a whole lot of opportunities to look at, hey, what else can we be doing here? And exactly as Jackie just said, how does the cannabis industry fit into the global recovery, and certainly the recovery in our region going forward?
So, quick question, quick follow-up on this. Given that curbside is in the works, how soon should we expect to see a drive-through ATC?
I don't think it's going to be brick and mortar drive-through. I think it's going to be virtual drive-through. Like, you're going to park in the parking lot. You'll have an app that gives you a time or something like that. You pull in, and some person is going to walk out to your car with a bag and hand it to you after this ID. I think it's going to be more
for closed down fast food restaurants there. Just saying.
Maybe down the line, but again, that's tomorrow. Right now, it's using the existing brick and mortar and innovative strategies. Maybe listen, we could use an old McDonald's at some point. That's probably a conversation we'll be having for a webinar in October. But right now, it's literally you're gonna park in the parking lot, and you're gonna have a cannabis a retailer employee come out and hand you your order, or your caregiver is going to do that, and you're never going to leave your house. Your caregiver is going to bring it home to you.
Yeah, but there are a lot of applicants right now. Bill's point's correct. I mean, the issue is, what can we deal with today, and how can we help patients today? And the curbside's certainly one of them. But some of the lessons learned we're going to get from this. There were many applicants that looked at banks because it was already brick and mortar, already had safety and security, and they also had drive-through. And there is expectation at some point, just like you would at a CVS. I mean, if I can go get my medication through drive-through CVS, at some point, patients at medical dispensaries would be able to do so as well. But again, we gathering all these things, lessons learned, how we can apply it, things we cared about, a couple of weeks ago, just irrelevant today. I think, but those are great ideas, and we need to capture all of them as we're looking at how we're going to advance the program moving forward. But today, what can we do now? And curbside's one, reducing prices one, and let's get home delivery up and running. I think that'll help create jobs. It'll help spur the economy, and lots of things the cannabis industry can be doing right now is continuing to stay motivated, understand where we are right now. But look, this is going to end. We're going to get on the other side of this. And there's a lot of people right now that are holding on to leases because they applied last round. They're already living with economic insecurity based on going through just being in the cannabis industry is really challenging. But what can we do now, and how can we and
oh, Scott froze up a bit.
Yep.
Oh, you there, bud?
It was brilliant. What I said was brilliant. It was brilliant. What I said.
No doubt.
I'm good. Go ahead.
So, moving along. So one of the assumptions of the current federal response plan is that it calls for 18 months of social distancing as part of efforts to flatten the curve and give our public health systems time to absorb the anticipated number of folks who will be subjected to this contagion. Given the length of time and our ongoing supply issues, does this strengthen the chances for home grow legislatively?
Listen, I think that there is a real prospect for a patient home grow like what was promised in 2009 when we were crafting the medical bill. I represent industry. I talk to a lot of folks in the industry. I know people think that the industry is fighting this. I've not heard one credible source in the cannabis industry that is opposed to that concept. I think there are broad concerns over a large black market. We've seen that other places related to regulatory issues and product safety. But if we're talking about allowing a patient to grow their own strain or something to that effect, I do think that there is an appetite for that. I think there's an appetite for regulators and also legislators as well. I want to caution folks, though, that I don't think that is a relief effort right now. I think what we can point to are crises like these because of the impediment at the federal level, Ford right now announced they're going to be turning their assembly line over to make masks and respirators and all sorts of types of medical equipment that Ford never made before, but they can do that. We just don't have that ability right now. So we've got to do other things. So I think we're building to that, but I don't see that as an opportunity right now in the next month. That might be something, though, that we're talking about this summer. And I do think there's merit to it. A patient home grow effort. I think there's absolute merit to that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And it really is, we talk about economic insecurity, but you know, having medical insecurity, it's a big deal. I mean, we talk about pain and anxiety and things like that, but if you have a child with Dravet syndrome and you don't have access to your medicine, that's a big freaking deal. And that should make people angry, right? So that should make people angry. And that is something we can't, like Bill said, I mean, it's not something that's going to happen this very moment, but it needs to happen. And this is a very valuable lesson learned. And we should not have this should not be continuing. So we can do things legislatively. We can create a home grow for patients. Those are things that we have to have an active discussion about. People should not have to worry about where they're going to get medicines for themselves or for their child.
I mean, I agree with what both Bill and Scott are saying. I think my concern is because that would be a regulatory fix, you know, a statutory fix, is the legislature amenable to it?
Right.
And how do we get them there? Do I think that this gives us the opportunity to fight harder, you know, for advocates to fight harder? Absolutely. But there is going to be an onslaught of advocates in all different sectors, right? Of all different of industries and social service groups. And, you know, it's going to be just a massive influx of how do we fix all of the things that we learned coming out of this? And so that's my hesitation. And perhaps I'm being a little too pessimistic, but
no.
Worrying about the legislature and their temperament to tackle this is my concern, not whether or not it should be or it shouldn't be. That's, you know, that's something that we're going to have to deal with. How do we get attention, quote unquote, in what will be a very loud and rightfully so period of time after this?
And I think that's probably the biggest thing right there, Jackie, is how do we keep this at the top of the level discussion? Clearly, in this group here, people are listening, people are in the industry, patients and advocates. This is something we're all very passionate about, but there's 1,000 other things that the state government and federal government are trying to do, or local authorities are trying to do, and where does this fall into the mix of things? And that's why I think, you know, just keeping the constant drumbeat. We'll talk about the ballot question when it's time to talk about the ballot question, right? But keeping the constant drumbeat of the patient's needs, patient's rights throughout this will help keep it up there. And I think, as Bill said earlier, there's a lot of people at home right now. It's a great opportunity to be reaching out to your senator, to your assembly member, to your mayors, to your federal elected officials. This is a great time to talk about, you
know. Scott's freezing up again.
Well, let me jump in.
Oh, sorry. Okay, jump in, Bill.
Let me just jump in because I think Scott was making a great point. I want to just echo that. We've got to be smart about what we're doing, though. And here's the point. And somebody who's been raising, I've seen some of the comments, well, why am we doing that? Why be advocating? Advocating for a patient's ability to grow their medicine is different than advocating for everyone to, because you run into problems then. You know, this community here, we already understand the benefits of cannabis. We've already rejected the reefer madness, okay? Not everybody's there yet. We're a lot better off today than we were a decade, 2 decades ago, but we're not there yet. And you still have mayors and police chiefs that want to what about? And the concern here is if your conversation is about, well, I should have the ability to grow it in my backyard and sell it to whomever I want without any type of regulatory effort, without having to report it to my town, without having to know when the police come to my house or fire department responds to my house that I have a grow facility in my base, that's not going to happen because no one's buying that right now. The focused conversation of saying, hey, I'm a patient and I should be able to grow my medicine at home, 6 plants or something like that, that you're never even going to know about, to be perfectly honest with you, but it shouldn't be criminalized. That's a different story. And I think there is absolutely support for that. If you're thinking about you want to be in the business side of this, there's a pathway for you too. And I'm not saying you have to be a monstrous MSO. We've talked about micro licensing. We've talked about smaller, what I'll call craft cannabis efforts that are going to come. It's crawl, walk, and run. But we're talking about patient medicine right now. And if you want to get on that bandwagon, these folks are exactly right. Start talking about patient grow. There's a movement grow that it's on online right now to do that. I think that has merit. I think legislators are willing to catch that. Jackie's right. We need the statutory relief to do that. That's your focus.
Great. Appreciate that. Turning to the ballot question, how is COVID-19 going to impact efforts for NJ 2020? And for those of you who don't know, that's the coalition formed together for the passage of the ballot referendum in November.
I mean, I think we're all going to have to think more creatively, right, about what the election is going to look like. New Jersey has vote by mail. If folks don't know, you can apply today. Just Google vote by mail NJ or New Jersey. It'll bring you to your county clerk's website. You can fill out a form, print it out, fill it out. I think you could probably even submit it online now. And it will allow you to vote by mail in all elections or just all November elections. We're gonna have to really push hard to educate and inspire people to go and vote. And I think, and I've said this at several different instances here, the folks on this call, the folks on this webinar, all of us, super leaned in, super aware. Less than a month ago, I was at my dental hygienist's getting a cleaning, and we're talking, no idea. Talking to friends, women who are teachers and in sales, and just Jane and Joe Citizen don't realize that this is on the ballot in November. And so the amount, and these are folks who consider themselves informed and are typically voters, but aren't connecting these dots. And so I've said time and time again, I do not think that it is going to be this onslaught of, reefer madness versus all of us who believe that this is the path forward. Our biggest challenge is people not realizing it's on the ballot or not knowing how to vote on the ballot, right? Because it's at the very bottom. It's kind of wonky. Yeah. We're gonna have to do a ton of social media, ad buys on things like Spotify, the ways that people are consuming Hulu. We all consume information so much differently now than we used to, right? It used to be a simple ad buy and you're done. Now you've got to really diversify how and where you're putting this information out and giving really specific details of this is how you register, this is how you vote by mail, and this is where it sits on both the in-person ballot and the vote by mail ballot. It's going to be a big campaign, and it's going to have to be really huge.
Yeah, and I'll tell you where we are right now, because I can update you on some things that have happened since Cannabis Insider hosted its event, and we made an announcement. There was sort of a movement forming. It's paused to some extent. So, for example, there's discussions about going out in the field with a poll. It would be malpractice to be in the field with a poll right now, asking anything related to cannabis ballot questions in the fall. Yeah. So we can't do that data gathering right now. The good news is there has still been efforts, I think, to coordinate and work with this broad community to figure out how we can do exactly as Jackie is saying, is educate the public that this is happening. But again, you don't want to be tone deaf to the current issues right now. And I think most of the focus has turned around to focusing on patients. And it has to be on patients right now because that's the number one priority. We'll get to the legalization effort, although I wanted to just caution everybody where I think we may be heading. We also talked about a legislative effort that would advance prior to the ballot question. There still may be an opportunity to do that, although we have no idea what is going to go on with the state budget, which is constitutionally required to be passed by June 30th. There may be talk of doing some sort of continuing resolution to punt, but again, way too premature. One thing you should focus on, though, and we may have a problem that we're going to have to deal with, is we don't know what's going to happen in terms of enforcement right now of folks that are continuing to be arrested in the black market. There are people that are continuing to be preyed upon in this effort right now that it shouldn't be. And, we just learned yesterday that the Attorney General has announced that they're going to be releasing low-level folks that were charged with low-level crimes from county jails. And some of those may be our brothers and sisters in this cannabis effort. You may see that become an issue with a rallying cry around decrim or some effort like that again, or a move to move something along the lines of legalization efforts, or a bill aimed at cannabis regulation, or I should say legalization and decriminalization, sometime now. It is way too soon to start figuring out what that's going to look like right now, though. I think everything's focused on what do we need to do in this next 2-week period to survive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely agree. It's right now, it's about what the patient's needs are and how we're going to communicate that, and what regulations we can loosen up a little bit to create greater access. I will say this, though, as when we do get on the other side of this, there's going to be need to create jobs. It's going to be construction. It's going to be a whole bunch of different issues. Getting the cannabis industry, getting the cannabis economy going will be critically important to that. And so the ballot question will be also part of that discussion will be about job creation. Absolutely. So we talked about social justice. We talked about patients' rights, and we have talked about to a limited way in the past about job creation and creating a new tax revenue for the state. That will definitely be a big part of this discussion. I think a lot of people, a lot of voters who may have been sort of a little apprehensive, or maybe they just didn't care about the issue. We're going to create new messaging coming on when we get to the other side of this. And I think people will care more about different things, and hopefully that'll be a big part of how we're going to get that ballot initiative passed.
Great. I want to provide plenty of opportunity because we've got a lot of. I don't know if you guys have checked out the chat site. We've got a lot of great questions in here, and I see
Samwise Ganji asked the question. I saw him go up there. That's awesome.
It's for me, old gaffer. All right, let me. I have some here shared in the Q&A. Okay, here's a interesting question here that we have touched on yet. What happens if a worker at an ATC tests positive for COVID-19? Is the product destroyed? I think to whatever extent you're able to answer, but it seems like for area, if somebody is in the retail and not necessarily touching the plant, then there's going to be sanitation that ends up happening in that regard. But Jackie, if you have some.
So I mean, I think that we've got a larger issue at hand in this, in that, epidemiologists, virologists, really, really smart, brilliant people are still trying to unpack exactly how long this virus lives on which types of surfaces, and really trying to unpack that. And so if it's somebody working on the retail side that's touching plastic and paper and things like that, I have heard from several different folks who are operating that they are going to great lengths to clean, countertops every hour, products very frequently, containers very frequently, keyboards, all of that. So I think that that's a little bit of a more manageable thing. If someone who is touching flower while it's either being grown or processed, test positive, I don't know, to be honest, what the solution is. Is there a way to sterilize the flower? Can you put it under UV? I would be lying to you if I said I had the perfect solution, because I'm not a virologist. I don't, do this for a living day in and day out anymore. So someone I know is definitely probably exploring that. But I don't happen to have that information right on the tips of my fingers. Right now.
I think it's really.
I was going to say, the department's put out guidance already to the current operators, and the primary concern right now is the health of patients and the health of these staff members. So this disease seems to be tracking sort of person to person. I don't think that we're much concerned about the product right now, because of sort of how product's prepared, and there's heat involved, and sometimes if you're smoking product, although we should probably talk about that in a second. The concern right now is isolating employees. So the number one issue is if an employee tests positive, they want that employee immediately removed from the operation, right? They can go home and deal with their health care, and then make sure that there's no one else that's going to be infected, right? So they isolate it. And the department's issued guidelines about a week ago that oddly enough are developing a patchwork quilt around the nation from this cannabis community, this industry and regulatory efforts that have created. And I will say this to you, I've been on probably a dozen calls for the last week and a half with a variety of different either national or in-state efforts that are going on, where we are sharing real-time ideas of what's going on. Everything from companies that are giving their best practices of what they're doing in terms of how they're separating grow staff from retail staff and not having these staff intertwine.
Yeah.
But another one, just something way outside the box. We have cannabis companies around the nation, not unlike their brothers and sisters in the alcohol industry, that have turned on some of their processing abilities to help produce sanitizer and things of that nature, both for in-store and then for their patients and then beyond. So there's a lot of innovation, I think, happening right now. I think this industry is kind of exactly where everybody else is. There are more questions than answers of what we know. So they're just doing the best to make sure that they can protect the public. The last thing I just say to folks at home, so we got a lot of people here that are users and patients and consumers, you know, your own safety is important and how you practice. So, you know, passing around, you know, joints and blunts and bongs and bowls and things of that nature, really, really bad idea right now. Also be careful, because we are starting to see that regardless of whether it's cannabis or not, that smoking and inhalation of vaping products may, I want to stress, exacerbate some of these lung ailments that are going on related to COVID-19. We don't know enough about that yet, so people should make their own judgments.
I mean, I can't agree with Bill more on this. It is a shame that this is, you know, a medicine that in many ways, the supply chain here in New Jersey, you are almost forced to smoke it because the amount of, you know, non-combustible products is incredibly, incredibly limited. Folks ask all the time why I went to go work for the company I left state government to go work for. It was because they expressly focused on consumption products, right? It started as a confection and now we've moved into pressed tablets because cannabis is medicine and we ought to treat it as such. So I think that, you know, this is a really anxious time to put something else into your lungs when we know that this is a respiratory virus. And it's frustrating that for so many folks in New Jersey and in many medicinal states, that there isn't the diversity of product, the diversity of form functions to give people more access to non-combustible products. If people want to choose to smoke, you know, that is their choice. But it is really hard to be looking down the barrel of this gun of a respiratory disease here and say, well, the only thing I can give you is something to smoke. I mean, it's almost antithetical to what we think of when we think of good respiratory health. And so that's a real challenge that I think we here in New Jersey and many other states are grappling with right now.
Yeah, you know, you talk to a doctor. I had a conversation with a doctor about a couple months ago, and they're struggling to get to, like, how can I, you know, prescribe this as a medicine? And what the phrase he actually used was, how can I conceivably prescribe?
Scott froze again.
Cannabis as a medicine, and the response is, "Oh no, how about now?"
Yep,
right.
You're good now.
Is it good? All right, sorry about that. All right, I'm outdoors, so it's very nice. No, but there are 1,000 different ways you can consume cannabis, and I think, you know, you can go online right now, and I found some fun sites, videos, and so forth, how you can convert your cannabis to an oil or to a butter, how you can ingest it at home. So even though the products are limited right now in New Jersey, or people have limited access to them, you can do a lot of different things at home. And Leafly.com had a great one earlier this week rather. And so there's going to be opportunities for people to medicate at home using different things. But as you're all saying, it's, you know, if you're ingesting hot air, hot vapor, smoke into your lungs, particularly if you have potential symptoms, then that's probably not the best way to consume your medicine.
Are you debuting your Cooking with Cannabis show right now? Is that what I just said?
Well, actually on April 15th, but now that's a little tease. I'll get to that later.
I like it.
I mean, joking aside, though, if we step back a second, and I think Bill opened with this, and it is so poignant, right? Like 10 years ago, to think that cannabis would be considered an essential business is like, who would have thought?
Yeah.
The flip side of that is that it is ludicrous and offensive to me that people are left to their own devices to cook their cannabis down into the medicine that they need to manage their symptoms. I mean, this is medicine for people. And I think we need to find more creative ways to diversify our market here in New Jersey and across the country to address that, because for some it's not that big a deal, and it's it's a joint here and it's a joint there and it's a little consumption, but that's not, to me, that is up there with the social justice stuff, to just say, well, just smoke it. I don't know why we're not more demanding of diversity of products, because this is our health and these are our lungs, and it's a real especially now, the risk and the reward of this is one that's going to feel a lot more delicate to many patients, right? That if they're starting to feel, and you've seen it all over the internet, is this a cold? Is this my allergies? Or is this the beginning of COVID? If you're kind of sitting there doing that waiting dance of 24 or 48 hours to see where you're going, and for many of us, I hope that it's, mild, or that it is just your seasonal allergies. The dynamic though is, do you want to take the gamble of smoking something? And that's real. And I think that if we pretend that that's not an anxiety on people's minds, I think we're deluding ourselves to some of the complexity of our patients and the people that need this as medicine.
All right. Great. Let's move to another question from, sorry, I have puppies below me that are playing right now. What do we see opportunities opening up for folks with prior convictions getting jobs and employment in the industry?
Yes.
It's something that we have been working, 1906 is not a license holder in New Jersey, but it is something that we have been outspoken to launch a program to do precisely that, to hire folks who have nonviolent drug offenses on their records, to give them a meaningful path into the middle class, into careers and job opportunities. We've worked closely with former Governor McGreevey and other folks in reentry spaces to talk about what that curriculum would look like. And I'm personally, as a company, eager to have that opportunity here should we get a license, and we're looking at how we do that, because it's a real path for people.
Yeah, and let's say this, it's not just the industry, but there's an absolute public policy interest in making sure, not just here in New Jersey, but across the nation, that ex-offenders are absolutely not only included, but welcomed into this, to not just work in the industry, to potentially be owners in this industry too. And there's efforts, I think, that are underway from the department standpoint of standing up some of these micro license opportunities for that purpose. There's also, if you look at the RFA language, the ability, I think, to encourage, again, ex-offenders related to the marijuana side of the world to be a part of this. But it's not just this industry. Ex-offenders who have a marijuana conviction on their record are shut out from working in Applebee's, from construction jobs and banking jobs and being an attorney. So the ability to deal with this is across the board a very important issue. I don't care if you're pro-cannabis or anti-cannabis. I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, wherever you are. If you think that people should be out work and lifting themselves up by their own bootstraps, then you should be on board with this. If you think people should avail themselves of their own opportunities to go out, get an education, work hard, and contribute back to the economy, you should be for this. We're talking about wiping off the record of these folks that made a stupid mistake, or frankly did something that no other people were doing and just happened to get caught, and otherwise could contribute back to this economy, and saying you should. Show me who's against that right now.
I got to tell you too, Bill, we're all experiencing limited freedom right now. We're all experiencing sheltering in place. We all have had our lives upended and our freedom limited. And now we're going to look at this and go, seriously, we were actually arresting people for cannabis, for a little bit of weed. We're destroying people's lives and their future opportunities for a little bit for a bag of weed or a joint here and there or something like that. It's ridiculous. I think we're all going to have different appreciations for things. We have to go through the process of expungement, decriminalization, and legalization. The things that we value and treasure so much right now that we're missing, people are experiencing right now in jail 10 times worse. So what Governor Murphy did the other day, or the announcement of the Attorney General, rather, of taking people out of prison right now, low-level crimes, getting them opportunities to get home with their families, so they're not exposed without a lot of health care in these prisons right now. That's a fantastic thing across the board. But when you look at the cannabis side of it too, people being arrested and losing their freedoms, future opportunities for something that we're now recognizing, all of us, as an essential medicine, as an essential industry. We're going to see a lot of that changing too.
Great. Let me move to another question here. Yeah. All right. So I'm going to the top question we have here. For ancillary businesses that see not only home delivery as a problem, but the logistics of when the market isn't all vertical. How can we all get involved as this virus expands? Because as this virus expands, transportation will be a factor due to shortages. How far do you think we are? State lines being not quite sure what the
interstate commerce questions.
Yeah, it seems like it.
We're not there.
That's a federal issue.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, I mean, listen, it is possible, and through some federal relief package, which is still being discussed in Congress right now, that someone decides at some point in time throughout this, effort that this might be something to work. I think that's pie in the sky right now. I think the best you're going to see out of the federal government's response right now might be looking at two things. Looking at the ability to cover some of this. We're seeing broad waivers come out on the medical side. And one of my colleagues in the healthcare community said we've literally blown away 20 years of healthcare regulation to deal with this crisis. Now that's all temporary. It will go away after this crisis is over. So maybe, insurance coverage or something like that could be potentially added at the federal level. And then you may see something in the way of relief coming. A lot of these businesses that are operating right now are no different than other businesses that are getting crushed as a result of this economic crisis that's going to balloon. But I think that's way down the path. I don't think that's going to come now. I just don't see anyone paying attention to this at a federal level now, with a caveat. If 2 weeks from now we're still sheltering in place, and it looks like 2 weeks from then we're still going to be sheltering in place, and we start to see regional supply shortages, you may see some emergent effort that allows a relaxation on this. To allow product across, but I don't sense that's a discussion going on right now that has any merit, and I don't want to give people false hope. I don't see that happening at the federal level right now. I'm hopeful we have some effort, by the way, where our federal legislators and our administration can agree on something. That's the most urgent issue on a global level right now. We don't have that yet.
Yeah, I'll add. So back to Bill's point earlier about kind of two buckets. Existing kind of urgent bucket and then longer term bucket. I think in the short term bucket, in the bucket to tackle right now, it's right. It's insurance coverage. It's the SBA and sort of Small Business Administration response. It's also things like the SAFE Act, right? Banking within the industry and freeing up a lot of the oversight and hurdles. I mean, it's a yeoman's task to just get health insurance, and 401ks are almost impossible, right? So doing things to make the industry operate more like the rest of the world operates. So you can go get a bank loan, you can do these things, I think should be included in that short-term list. I hold steady. It might be a long shot. It might be our moonshot. I hold steady that in the 6-month list, it's the end of prohibition or it's the end of descheduling, because I think that there's going to be a need for jobs like we have never seen in this country in our lifetimes. And cannabis can be a path forward to that. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I'm still going to keep talking about it because I think it's the most innovative idea I've heard of, that you could replicate in mass scale, and that you would build in a whole universe of consumers that don't exist. These small businesses that are closing, the pizza parlors and the restaurants and there's only so much takeout we can eat. As scary as that sounds, right? Like there's only so much we can do to up our consumption, especially as more and more people start to lose their jobs or get furloughed. Those are going to become, expenses that people are more reticent to make, right? You're going to start pinching your pennies more and more. So I think that if we just pretend that the economy is going to bounce back all by itself, we're fooling ourselves. And I'm holding on to cannabis in that long shot.
Yeah.
I'd quibble with Jackie's point about there's only so much food we can eat with a father of 3 boys. I'm wondering if we're going to survive this. But let me just say something to you, though, just important for the army of activists that are watching here and industry folks that have an interest in helping here. I'm going to give you a talk about where Joe Biden is as an example. So Vice President Biden has had, I got a little ahead of myself, Vice President Biden has had a fairly horrible position on cannabis. And as a supporter of his, but also as an advocate for this, I've been troubled. But I don't need perfection on this right now at the federal level. I'm not looking for that. And the idea here that we're going to, quote, legalize whatever legalization means to you at home is probably not going to happen right now. But what we do need is we need to move this discussion away from where everybody's gotten comfortable. So, I'm for medical. That means nothing anymore, okay? 99.9% of the American public are for medical. Great. What does that mean? That means real decriminalization. That means access through the VA, through Medicare, through Medicaid, in terms of private and public insurance funding this. That means the SAFE Act, as Jackie mentioned. There are real reforms and descheduling or rescheduling.
Yeah.
Medical research would be a #1 issue, and the ability to recognize the state's operations that are in place and allow free flow of interstate commerce to go. These are things that would revolutionize where we are today. But I didn't say legalization once in that conversation. So I think there's an ability to advocate and to get some wins at the federal level right now, but we got to be smart about what we're asking for. Don't push people further than they're willing to go right now. We've got a lot of room, lot of room that we can catch up on.
I mean, the old adage, right, that compromise, right, and I've heard this metaphor a million times over. If you've got a pie and you want the whole pie, someone's going to give you a piece of the pie and leave the rest on the table to come back to later. Take that piece, right? Is it everything we would want? Absolutely not. But is it probably 20 years worth of policy changes that we could get in 6 months if we're smart and we push hard? Maybe. And that to me is worth it, right? That's definitely worth it.
That's part of the ongoing one of the recurrent themes as long as I've been covering the cannabis space is don't make the perfect the enemy of the good.
Nice.
Good advice.
1000%.
I think we have time for just one more question because we are scheduled to end this at noon. I want to get to the Dana Belka's question here about medical cannabis doctors who recommend they do not qualify for telemedicine. When do you expect some sort of changes on that?
Wasn't that part of a change that was just announced?
Yeah. So just wanted to clarify that for everybody.
So let me offer what's going on, because I'm dealing with this in the real world medical community in addition to just the cannabis medical community. There's been some rapid changes. So Friday, the governor signed into law, telemedicine law that the legislature just passed, that it broadly expands the scope of this. And the department has also changed some regulations. So I think the best thing to do for medical marijuana doctors that are part of the program is to look on the website. There's guidance now, and there will be future guidance coming out from the department on how you can access that. But my understanding is that the program is now allowing telemedicine, and there was a piece of legislation that's been working its way through the legislature as well. But my understanding is telemedicine is allowed. We'll follow up and make sure of that. But I've been on a variety of calls that it's in play now.
I think it was signed in as part of his most recent order to allow that. And look, Dana's with CannaCare Docs, by the way. I'm going to give them a good plug. They just joined up with the NJCBA, so my organization, and members of the NJCBA patient members will be able to get a discount at CannaCare Docs in the near future. But that being said, that this is one of those things it's obvious for those of us who are in this industry. Cannabis is a medicine. Sometimes it's a second thought, but not this governor, not this department. So they've been advocating for patients and doctors to be able to handle this safely and effectively. So it's very impressed with what they're doing. Well,
I want to thank you all for joining us today. Thank Jackie, Scott, as always. Thanks. It's been a great conversation. For our audience, I'm sorry we couldn't get to everybody's questions. There's a lot of you, but I'll try and do my best offline to try to get back at what we're able to. Again, thank you so much. And we can all, in the privacy of our homes as we social distance, we can all give a round of applause for our speakers. Thank you guys.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for doing this.
Please,
Thanks for having
everyone,
us.
stay safe and healthy. Social distancing. Wash your hands.
Stay home.
Be well. Everyone.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys. Be safe.
Yeah.